A real estate agent sold an abandoned house to a couple. Weeks after the sale, the agent was disturbed by the call he received from the new owners. Mark parked his shiny Cadillac in front of the imposing Victorian house, adjusting his tie in the rearview mirror. At 55 years old, his grey hair and piercing blue eyes conveyed an unshakable confidence. On the sidewalk, Cooper Baker, a middle-aged man with broad shoulders and an anxious expression, was helping his wife Penelope out of the car. Penelope, an elegant woman with red hair and a warm smile, could hardly contain her excitement. Mark watched the couple with a genuine smile and approached them. "Welcome to your future home, Mr. and Mrs. Baker. I'm sure you will fall in love with every detail." Penelope looked at the impressive facade and exclaimed, "Oh, Cooper, just look at this architecture. It's exactly what we've always dreamed of." As they climbed the steps to the porch, Mark noticed Mr. Peterson, the previous owner, nervously peeking through the window of the neighboring house. Their eyes met briefly, and Peterson quickly closed the curtains. Mark frowned, intrigued by the strange behavior. Cooper, noticing the exchange of looks, asked curiously, "Is that the former owner? He seems a bit troubled." Mark responded casually, "Yes, that's Mr. Peterson. He's always been a reserved man. He's probably just feeling nostalgic about the house." Penelope, however, seemed intrigued. "There's something odd about all this, don't you think, dear?" "Why would someone sell such a beautiful house?" Mark intervened reassuringly. "Actually, Mrs. Baker, Mr. Peterson is moving to be closer to his family. Sometimes life takes us down new paths." As they entered the house, the aroma of old wood and a sense of mystery enveloped them. Mark began his enthusiastic speech about the architectural details. "Notice the original woodwork in this entry hall. It's a true work of art." Suddenly, a noise echoed from upstairs. Cooper frowned. "What was that?" "I thought the house was empty." Mark, without losing his composure, explained, "Oh, don't worry. Old houses like this have a personality of their own. It's just the wood adjusting to the temperature." He smiled reassuringly, but Penelope didn't seem completely convinced. She looked around with a mix of fascination and apprehension. "Mark, this house must have so many stories to tell. Do you know anything about the previous residents?" As they moved through the house, Mark shared fascinating details about each room, keeping the Bakers captivated and distracted from any concerns. When they reached the master bedroom, Cooper noticed something on the wallpaper. "Hey, what's this here? It looks like..." "A strange mark?" Mark approached to examine it. Good eye, Mr. Baker." "Actually, this is an interesting detail from the house's history. During the restoration, they discovered that this was a common pattern in Victorian-era wallpaper. They decided to keep a piece as a tribute to the original history." Penelope was impressed. "How fascinating. I love these little historical details. It makes the house feel even more special, doesn't it, Cooper?" The tour continued, with Mark skillfully guiding the couple through the various rooms, his experience and knowledge evident in every explanation. When they finally reached the attic, Mark opened the door with a dramatic flourish. "And here we have the crown jewel, a versatile space that can be transformed into anything you desire." As they entered, a gentle breeze enveloped them, carrying the scent of old wood. Cooper explored the space with growing interest. "Wow, this is incredible." Penelope, "Imagine the art studio you could have here." While the couple eagerly discussed the possibilities, Mark noticed a subtle bulge in the wall. Without drawing attention to it, he skillfully steered the conversation. "The previous owners used this space as a library. The natural light is perfect for reading or any hobby you might have." Penelope, excited about the possibilities, turned to Mark. "This house is simply perfect. We have to buy it," Penelope said, thrilled about the purchase. Cooper nodded, sharing his wife's enthusiasm. "You're right, dear. Mark, I think we've found our new home. When can we finalize the deal?" he asked, nodding. Mark smiled, pleased with the success of the visit. Excellent choice. We can take care of the paperwork right now if you're ready." He pulled a folder from his briefcase, revealing the necessary documents. "I have everything here with us. Let's go downstairs and use the dining room table to sign the papers." As they descended the stairs, Penelope couldn't contain her excitement. "Let's go, Cooper. I can't wait to decorate every room. I can already see our lives here." Cooper smiled, gently squeezing his wife's hand. "I know, dear. This house feels like it was made for us." In the dining room, Mark meticulously arranged the documents on the polished mahogany table. "All right, I'll guide you through each document. Don't hesitate to ask questions if anything is unclear," he said, his voice conveying professionalism and confidence. Cooper and Penelope sat down, exchanging expectant looks as Mark explained each detail of the contract. After an hour of careful reviews and signatures, Mark closed the folder with a satisfied smile. "Congratulations, Mr. and Mrs. Baker. You are officially the new owners of this beautiful residence." Penelope clapped her hands in joy, while Cooper shook Mark's hand firmly. "Thank you, Mark. You made this process much easier than we imagined," Cooper said, the gratitude evident in his voice. As they headed to the front door, Mark handed the keys to the couple. "Here they are, the keys to your new home. I hope you have many happy years here." Penelope took the keys, her eyes shining with emotion. "Oh, Mark, I don't even know how to thank you. You helped us make a dream come true," she said, grateful. As they stepped out onto the porch, ready to say goodbye, they noticed a familiar figure on the sidewalk. It was Mr. Peterson, the former owner, staring at them with a somber expression. Before Mark could intervene, Peterson stepped forward and said in a low but audible voice, "You shouldn't have done that." Without waiting for a response, he abruptly turned and walked back to his house, leaving a heavy silence in the air. Cooper and Penelope exchanged confused and worried looks. Mark, maintaining his professional composure, tried to ease the tension. "Don't worry about Mr. Peterson. He's probably just emotional about seeing his old house with new owners. I'm sure he didn't mean anything by it." The agent intervened, trying to keep the situation light. But as he said goodbye to the Bakers, Mark couldn't shake a sense of unease. What exactly did Mr. Peterson mean with that cryptic warning? What does he know about the house? He wondered. 3 weeks after the sale of the Victorian house, Mark was in his office, reviewing contracts for other properties. The afternoon sun filtered through the blinds, casting long shadows across his mahogany desk. Suddenly his phone rang, the shrill sound breaking the silence. When he answered, Cooper Baker's frantic voice filled his ears. "Mark, you need to come here right now." Something happened, Penelope found. "Oh my God," Mr. Cooper said, urgency in his voice. This made Mark jump to his feet, knocking over a pile of papers. Before he could respond, he heard Penelope screaming in terror. Then he heard her say in the background, "There's something here." "Mark, please come quickly." The call then ended abruptly, leaving Mark stunned. He murmured to himself, adrenaline beginning to surge through his veins. What the hell is happening in that house? Why was she screaming? What did they find, he wondered. Mark grabbed his keys and rushed to his car, his mind racing with alarming possibilities. As he drove through the tree-lined streets of the suburb, he mentally replayed every detail of the sale, searching for something he might have missed. Peterson's cryptic warning echoed in his memory. When he reached the Bakers Street, he noticed unusual activity in the neighborhood. Curious neighbors were peeking from behind their curtains, some even venturing onto their porches to watch. Mark parked abruptly and ran to the front door, his heart pounding in his chest. He rang the doorbell repeatedly, shouting, "Mr. and Mrs. Baker, it's me, Mark. Are you there? Why aren't you answering?" What could be so terrible that it left you in shock? Mark thought, his mind racing. The silence that followed was deafening. After several agonizing minutes, the door finally opened. Cooper stood there, pale as a ghost, his eyes wide with fear. "Mark, thank God you're here," he whispered, pulling the agent inside. The house was eerily quiet, except for a muffled sound coming from upstairs. Cooper led Mark up the stairs, his hands visibly trembling. "It's in the attic. Penelope is there. She doesn't want to leave," he murmured. As they approached the attic door, Mark could hear soft sobs. He turned to Cooper, seeking more information. "What exactly did you find?" "I need to know before we go in," the agent asked, concerned. Cooper swallowed hard, his voice barely a whisper. "You won't believe it. We can hardly believe it ourselves. It's as if this house has been hiding a terrible secret all these years," he said. Mark slowly opened the attic door, the old wood creaking in protest. The scene that unfolded made his blood run cold. Penelope was kneeling on the floor, sobbing uncontrollably in front of a partially demolished wall. Pieces of plaster and wood were scattered around, revealing a hidden cavity. Mark approached cautiously, his eyes adjusting to the dim light. Then, Mark moved closer to the partially demolished wall, his heart racing. His eyes widened as he noticed a rusted metal box and a pile of yellowed papers inside the newly exposed cavity. Carefully, he removed the items, placing them on the dusty attic floor. Penelope, still trembling, wiped away her tears and approached, her curiosity momentarily overcoming her fear. Cooper joined them, forming a tense circle around the mysterious objects. Mark picked up the papers, recognizing them as newspaper clippings. As he examined them more closely, he felt a chill run down his spine. Oh my God, these are articles about a family that disappeared when they lived in this house 15 years ago and was presumed dead. They never found anything about the case, he murmured. Penelope let out a stifled sob, her body visibly shaking. Mark, what if the same thing happens to us? We're living in the house where an entire family vanished. Cooper hugged his wife, trying to calm her, but his own voice betrayed his concern. Let's stay calm. There must be a rational explanation for all this. Cooper frantically flipped through the clippings, his face growing paler with each page. The articles detailed the mysterious disappearance of the Henderson family, father, mother, and 2 small children. The extensive searches, the police theories, the desperate pleas from relatives, all led to nothing. It was as if the earth had swallowed the 4 of them. And there, in black and white, was a photo of the Victorian house that now belonged to the Bakers. The same imposing facade, the same ornate windows, the same well-kept garden. It was undeniable. This was the house of the disappearance. Penelope let out a stifled sob. Cooper, what does this mean? Are we living at the scene of a crime? Cooper hugged his wife, trying to appear strong despite the tremor in his voice. Calm down, dear. There must be a rational explanation for all this. As the couple processed the shocking revelation, Mark turned his attention to the metal box. It was locked, with no obvious sign of how to open it. He examined it from every angle, looking for a lock or mechanism. This box must contain more information. If only we could open it, he murmured, more to himself than to the others. Suddenly, a high-pitched howl of wind cut through the air, making all 3 of them jump. The attic windows rattled, and a cold draft swept through the space, lifting dust and making the newspaper clippings flutter. Penelope clutched Cooper's arm, her eyes wide with fear. Did you hear that? It's not natural. It's like the house is screaming. Cooper tried to stay calm, but his voice betrayed his own apprehension. It's just the wind, dear. Old houses make strange noises. Mark continued, struggling with the box, his frustration growing with each failed attempt to open it. The howling wind intensified, creating an increasingly oppressive atmosphere in the attic. Penelope began pacing back and forth, her anxiety palpable. We need to get out of here. This house, there's something wrong with it. Ever since we moved in, I've been hearing things. Footsteps in the middle of the night, whispers in the walls. I thought it was my imagination, but now, she said. But Penelope was interrupted by a deafening crash. The attic door slammed shut violently, causing everyone to turn in shock. Cooper rushed to it, trying to open it, but it was hopelessly stuck. He pulled and pushed, but the door wouldn't budge. It's locked. How is this possible? There's no lock on this side, he shouted, panic evident in his voice. Mark dropped the box and joined Cooper, both struggling in vain against the stubborn door. Penelope fell to her knees, hugging herself, her eyes fixed on the scattered newspaper clippings on the floor. Her voice was barely a whisper when she spoke. The house. There's something wrong with this place, and now we're trapped here. The wind continued to howl as if mocking their despair, while the grim reality of their situation settled over them. They were trapped in the attic, with nothing but unanswered questions and a deepening mystery. The tense silence that followed was broken by the metallic sound of Mark attacking the rusted box. He used an old screwdriver found in a corner of the attic, inserting it into the gaps and applying pressure. Cooper joined him, holding the box firmly while Mark worked. Penelope watched, her wide eyes reflecting the fear and curiosity battling inside her. After several minutes of effort, the lid finally gave way with a sharp snap. My God, you need to see this, he murmured, his voice barely contained. Penelope approached hesitantly, her voice trembling. What is it, Mark? What did we find? Mark began removing the items from the box one by one, placing them carefully on the dusty floor. There was a stack of old photographs, some in black and white, others in faded colors, yellow documents with folded corners and time-worn stains. And to everyone's surprise, several videotapes, their labels almost illegible. Cooper picked up one of the photos, his face visibly paling. This is the family from the newspapers, he said, showing the picture to the others. The photo depicted a smiling family, father, mother, and two small children, in front of the same Victorian house where they now stood. Penelope let out a broken sigh. They look so happy. How could something so terrible happen to them? She said as Mark examined the documents, his brow furrowed in concentration. These seemed to be records of the house, old things, even some personal letters. All belonging to the Henderson family, he informed. As they searched through the contents of the box, the wind outside seemed to grow stronger. The attic windows rattled, and the wooden floor creaked under their feet. Mark found a particularly disturbing photo. It showed the father of the Henderson family in the attic, pointing to the same false wall they had discovered. His face had an expression of concern, almost of fear. Noticing Mark's expression, Cooper asked, "What is it?" "What did you see?" Mark hesitated for a moment before showing the photo. It looks like Mr. Henderson knew about the hiding place. But why? What was he trying to hide? Penelope, flipping through more photos, noticed something strange. Look, in the last few photos, they seem different, scared, as if they knew something bad was about to happen. Time passed, and the pile of evidence grew around them. Photos showed the family in various rooms of the house at different times of the year. The documents revealed mundane details of the Hendersons' life, bills, receipts, personal notes. But it was the videotapes that intrigued Mark the most. "We need to watch these tapes. They might contain clues about what really happened here," he said, his voice firm. Cooper nodded, but Penelope seemed hesitant. "But how?" "We don't have a VHS player here," she said. At that moment, as if answering her question, they heard a dull thud from downstairs. Everyone froze, exchanging anxious looks. Mark was the first to move toward the door. "Let's try to get out of here. Maybe this is our only chance to get out alive," he said. With a final effort, Mark managed to force the door open. It creaked open, revealing the dark hallway beyond. The trio cautiously exited the attic, their hearts pounding. As they descended the stairs, they noticed that the house was eerily silent. The howling wind had completely stopped. When they reached the entry hall, they saw the front door wide open, gently tapping against the wall. Mark examined the lock, frowning. "It looks like it was just the wind that locked us up there. The draft must have slammed the attic door shut." Cooper let out a sigh of relief. But Penelope still seemed uneasy. "Mark, what do we do now?" "With everything we've discovered." Mark turned to the couple, his expression serious but determined. "Look, I know this is all scary and confusing, but I promise you it's safe. In any case, I'm going to investigate all of this. I'll find out what happened to the Hendersons and make sure there's nothing wrong with the house. For now, there's nothing to worry about. It was just a series of strange coincidences." He paused, looking at the worried faces of Cooper and Penelope. "Trust me, okay? We'll figure this out together," he said before saying goodbye and rushing to his car. Mark drove through the city, his thoughts troubled by the discoveries at the Baker's house. The sun was already setting, casting long shadows over the empty streets. He picked up his cell phone, hesitated for a moment, and then dialed a number he hadn't used in years. After 3 rings, a rough voice answered, "Detective Ramirez." Mark took a deep breath before speaking. "Ramirez, it's Mark. Mark Holloway. I need your help with something." "Delicate." There was a pause on the other end of the line, followed by a tired sigh. "Mark, it's been a while. And what have you gotten yourself into this time?" he asked. Mark parked his car in a dark alley, turning off the engine. "How do I explain this without sounding completely crazy?" he thought to himself. "Hills Ramirez, do you remember the Henderson case? That family that disappeared 15 years ago?" Mark asked, his voice low and urgent. Ramirez was silent for a moment before responding, "How could I forget? It was the case that nearly ended my career. Why are you asking about it now? Mark hesitated, choosing his words carefully. I sold their house to a couple, and they found something. He could almost hear Ramirez straightening up in his chair. What kind of something, as Mark? The agent closed his eyes, recalling the scene in the attic. Documents, photos, videotapes, all hidden behind a false wall. Ramirez cursed under his breath. Damn it, Mark. Do you realize what you've just uncovered? The detective asked. Mark shook his head, even though he knew Ramirez couldn't see him. That's why I'm calling. I need to know what you know about the case, Ramirez, without involving the media or the police. Yet, Ramirez was silent for so long that Mark thought the call had dropped. Finally, the detective spoke. Meet me at Café Noir in an hour. Come alone and don't talk to anyone about this. Before Mark could respond, Ramirez hung up. Mark looked at the phone in his hand, a mix of relief and apprehension washing over him. What have I gotten myself into? He murmured to himself as he started the car again. Mark headed to the meeting place, his mind filled with unanswered questions. Café Noir was a discreet establishment, frequented mostly by long-time residents of the town. Mark entered, spotting Ramirez in a secluded corner. The retired detective looked older than Mark remembered, with deep wrinkles and graying hair. Thanks for meeting me, Ramirez, Mark began, but Ramirez gently interrupted him. Before we start, you need to understand something, Mark. The Henderson case isn't just an unsolved mystery. It's a curse that has haunted our town for years. Are you sure you want to get involved in this? Ramirez said, leaning forward, his tired eyes fixed on Mark. The agent swallowed hard, feeling the weight of the decision. There's no turning back after this, but I can't abandon the Bakers now. Tell me everything, Ramirez, Mark said, his voice firm despite his nerves. Ramirez sighed before beginning. The Hendersons were just the beginning, Mark. They were an ordinary family. John was a teacher, Mary a nurse. They had 2 small children. One autumn night, 15 years ago, they simply vanished. No clues, no explanations. But it didn't stop there. In the years that followed, 2 more families who moved into that house also disappeared mysteriously. Always the same pattern. One moment they were there, the next they just ceased to exist. Mark nodded, remembering the newspaper clippings. Mark felt a chill down his spine. And the owner, Mr. Peterson? He asked, dreading the answer. Ramirez gave a sad smile. Our old Peterson. He's the only one who escaped the fate of the house. Do you know why? Mark shook his head, and Ramirez continued. Because he never actually lived there. He bought the property as an investment, but after learning the history, he was too scared to move in. He tried to sell it for years, without success, until the Bakers bought it. The detective fixed Mark with a penetrating gaze. Now tell me, why do you think Peterson was so nervous during the sale? Mark felt the blood freeze in his veins. Oh my God, he knew. He knew all about this, he murmured, more to himself than to Ramirez. The detective nodded gravely. And now the Bakers are there. Mark, do you realize the danger you've put them in? He asked. Mark felt the weight of his words, his mind racing, searching for a solution. What can we do, Ramirez? Ramirez took a long sip of his coffee before responding. I don't know if we can do much, Mark, but I know we need to act quickly. Every day they spend in that house. Well, let's just say time isn't on the Bakers' side. I'll go over the case files again, and if I find any new information, I'll contact you, he said. Mark stood up abruptly, determination in his eyes. Yes, keep me informed. I'll talk to the Bakers. The next day, Cooper Baker carried an old VCR into the living room. He had found the device for sale at an antique shop in town. Penelope was arranging the tapes found in the attic on the coffee table. The couple exchanged apprehensive looks before Cooper connected the VCR to the television. Are you sure you want to do this, Pen? Cooper asked, his voice betraying a mix of fear and curiosity. Penelope nodded, determined. We need to know, Cooper. We can't just ignore what we found, she replied. With a resigned sigh, Cooper turned on the VCR and inserted the first tape. The screen flickered, revealing grainy images of a birthday party. The Henderson family smiled at the camera, little Michael blowing out candles on a colorful cake. Penelope felt a lump in her throat as she saw the joy on the faces of the missing family. Tape after tape, they watched everyday moments of the Hendersons, beach vacations, school recitals, family dinners. Cooper held Penelope's hand, both feeling the weight of the story unfolding before them. "They seemed so happy, so normal," Penelope murmured, tears welling up in her eyes. "How does a family like that just disappear without a trace?" Cooper added, intrigued. As they progressed through the tapes, they noticed a subtle change. The smiles of the Henderson family seemed more strained, their looks more apprehensive. In a video dated just a week before the disappearance, John Henderson appeared distracted during dinner, frequently glancing at the windows. Mary, his wife, tried to maintain lively conversation, but her voice trembled slightly. Cooper paused the tape, frowning. "Do you see this, Pen?" It's like they knew something was wrong. Penelope nodded, a shiver running down her spine. But what? What could have scared an entire family so much? Finally, they reached the last tape. The date in the lower corner of the screen indicated it was from the day before the Hendersons disappeared. The image showed John Henderson alone in his office, the camera apparently left on the desk by accident. He seemed agitated, pacing back and forth, running his hands through his hair repeatedly. Suddenly, a voice off camera caught his attention. John turned, at his face a mask of fear and anger. "You're not going to do anything to my family, do you understand? I won't let you intimidate us. I'm not going to run, I'm not going to hide," he shouted at the person off-screen. The argument escalated, with John gesturing frantically. Penelope grabbed Cooper's arm, her breathing quickening. "My God, Cooper, what's happening here?" The scene continued, with John becoming increasingly agitated. "Don't threaten my family. I'll do whatever it takes to protect them. Do you hear me?" "Your words don't scare me," he shouted furiously. The voice off camera said something inaudible, and John closed the door and collapsed into his chair, defeated. "You're right, dear, we can't tell anyone. Not even the police," he murmured. The tape ended abruptly, leaving Cooper and Penelope in stunned silence. Cooper turned off the television with trembling hands, then turned to face his wife. "Pen, I think we just witnessed the last moments of the Hendersons before they disappeared," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. Penelope nodded slowly, the fear evident in her eyes. "Cooper, what if something terrible happened to them, and whoever did it finds out that we found this tape?" she asked and worried. Mark was sitting in his office, the last rays of the setting sun filtering through the blinds, when his phone rang. Ramirez's name flashed on the screen, making his heart race. He quickly answered, his voice tense. "Ramirez, what did you find out?" The detective's rough voice sounded tired on the other end of the line. "Mark, I spent the entire afternoon digging through old files. The Henderson case, so it's more complicated than we thought. The case was officially closed due to a lack of concrete evidence, but there was something else. Something that never made it to the newspapers." Mark leaned forward in his chair, absorbing every word, feeling a chill run down his spine. What could be so secret that it stayed out of public records, he wondered. Ramirez paused, as if gathering the courage to continue. "There was a suspect, Mark. Someone who was never officially charged, but who was at the center of the entire investigation," Ramirez said. Mark gripped the phone tighter, his mind racing with possibilities. "Who, Ramirez? Who was the suspect?" the agent asked, curious. Ramirez's answer came in a low and cautious tone. "His name is Victor Crane. He was the Hendersons' neighbor at the time, living in the house next door." Mark frowned, trying to remember if he had ever heard that name before. Ramirez continued. "Crane was a strange guy, always watching the family. We had witnesses who saw him arguing with John Henderson days before the disappearance." Mark felt his stomach drop. Why would a neighbor harm them? Were the Hendersons the ones who reported him or someone else? He thought, trying to grasp the situation. "Why was he never charged, Ramirez?" Mark asked, his voice betraying his frustration. Ramirez sighed heavily. "Lack of physical evidence. We had suspicions, circumstantial testimonies, but nothing concrete. And then, shortly after the case went cold, Crane simply disappeared," the detective said. Standing up abruptly, Mark began pacing back and forth in his office. "John disappeared? What do you mean, Ramirez? Did he flee?" Ramirez's response was grim. "No one knows for sure. One day he was there, the next. His house was empty. Some say he moved, others... Well, you know the stories that circulate about that house." Mark stopped in front of the window, watching the street darken outside. My God, Ramirez! I never imagined a neighbor could be the suspect behind all this, he murmured. Ramirez continued, his voice now filled with urgency. Mark, there's one more thing. I've been investigating on my own all these years, and we also have to remember that Crane wasn't the only one to disappear. There were the other people who moved into the old Henderson house. Entire families who simply vanished without a trace. Mark felt the blood freeze in his veins, remembering the Bakers. Ramirez seemed to read his thoughts. Mark, you need to get that couple out of there. Now, before it's too late, the detective ordered, his voice full of concern. Mark nodded, even though Ramirez couldn't see him. I'll talk to them and see what they think of all this. I don't know if they're prepared or if they know anything about it. Either way, thank you for your help, Ramirez, Mark said, as he grabbed his keys and rushed to the door. As Mark drove frantically through the dark streets towards the Baker's house, his mind was in turmoil. Ramirez's revelations, the mysterious Victor Crane. Everything seemed to be intertwining in an incomprehensible way. He gripped the steering wheel tightly, determined to arrive in time. I have to do something to stop this nightmare from continuing. I can't just stand by, he murmured to himself. As he approached the Baker's neighborhood, Mark couldn't help but notice how the shadows seemed deeper, the streets emptier. It was as if the night itself was conspiring to hide terrible secrets. He parked in front of the house, his heart pounding in his chest. This doesn't feel right. I have a bad feeling that something terrible is going to happen tonight, he thought before getting out of the car. Mark climbed the steps to the Baker's porch with his heart racing, ringing the doorbell repeatedly. The door opened almost instantly, revealing the pale and tense faces of Cooper and Penelope. Mark, thank God you're here, Penelope exclaimed, pulling him inside. The living room was a mess of scattered papers and photos, the TV still on, showing static. Cooper was holding a photo in his trembling hands, his eyes wide with excitement and fear. Mark, you're not going to believe what we found, he said, extending the photo. Mark took it, turning it over to examine the back. There, scribbled in faded ink, was a series of numbers. His heart skipped a beat as he recognized the pattern. These are geographic coordinates, he murmured, looking at the couple. Penelope nodded frantically. Exactly! And there's more, Mark. Look at the date on this photo. Mark turned the photo over again, noticing the stamped date in the corner. It was from the day before the Hendersons disappeared. The image showed a remote, densely wooded area with what appeared to be the entrance to a cave partially hidden by vegetation. This could be the key to the whole mystery, but we don't know what to do. Should we call the police? Or investigate on our own? Cooper asked, his voice trembling slightly. Mark hesitated, weighing the options. Calling the police would mean exposing everything they had discovered, potentially attracting unwanted attention. On the other hand, going alone could be dangerous. He looked at the anxious faces of the Bakers, feeling the weight of responsibility. As what if it's a trap? Or worse, what if we find something we shouldn't? Mark thought. After a moment of reflection, Mark made his decision. We'll investigate ourselves. But we need to be cautious. I'll go with you, he said firmly. Penelope let out a sigh of relief, while Cooper nodded gravely. Quickly, they gathered flashlights, water, and some basic supplies. Mark insisted on leaving a detailed note about where they were going, in case something went wrong. As they prepared, the tension in the air was palpable. What if we find bodies? Penelope whispered to Cooper. Her husband swallowed hard before looking at her. Then at least the families will have closure. But I hope we find something better, he replied quietly. The drive to the coordinates was silent and tense. Mark was driving, his eyes alternating between the dark road and the makeshift GPS on his phone. Cooper and Penelope sat in the back seat, their hands clasped together, nervously looking out the window. As they moved further away from the city, the lights faded behind them, replaced by the deep darkness of the forest. The path became rougher, forcing Mark to slow down. We're almost there, he announced, his voice echoing in the silence of the car. Penelope leaned forward, her eyes scanning the darkness. Mark, do you think we can really find answers here? She asked hesitantly. Mark gripped the steering wheel, his determination masking his own fear. I don't know, Penelope. But whatever we find, we can't ignore it anymore. We have to find out, he said. Finally, The car came to a stop in a small clearing. The headlights partially illuminated the dense vegetation ahead. Mark turned off the engine, the sudden silence weighing on them. "This is it," he said, his voice firmer than he felt. They got out of the car, flashlights in hand, the cold night air making them shiver. Cooper consulted the photo once more, pointing to a rocky formation in the distance. "The cave entrance should be over there," he said. They began to walk, the sound of their footsteps muffled by the underbrush. Mark led the way, pushing aside branches and checking the ground. With each step, the feeling that they were being watched grew stronger. Penelope suddenly stopped, grabbing Cooper's arm. "Did you hear that?" she whispered, her eyes wide with fear. A distant sound, like a branch snapping, echoed through the forest. Mark felt the hairs on the back of his neck stand up. "Probably just an animal," he said without much conviction. But as they moved closer to the mysterious cave, Cooper turned to his wife, his voice somber. "Whatever happened to the Hendersons, we're about to find out. And we might not like the answers we find," he said before continuing to walk. As Mark, Cooper, and Penelope Baker approached the coordinates, the dense forest gave way to an unexpected clearing. In the center stood a solitary house, its weathered facade telling silent stories of abandonment. Mark felt a shiver run down his spine, not of fear but of anticipation. He knew this place well, every board and every shadow. "It looks like we've found something," he said, his voice strangely calm. Cooper and Penelope exchanged uneasy glances, the tension between them palpable. "How should we go in?" Penelope asked, her voice trembling slightly. Mark nodded, a peculiar gleam in his eyes. "Yes, let's investigate. After all, we came here for answers, didn't we?" he replied with a dark smile threatening to appear. With cautious steps, the trio approached the front door. Mark, surprisingly familiar with the place, guided them with confidence. The door creaked as it opened, revealing a dusty and dim interior. Cooper hesitated at the entrance. "Mark, how do you seem to know this place so well?" he asked, grin uneasy. Mark shrugged, his response calculatedly casual. "Realtor's instinct, I suppose." "Come on, there's nothing to fear here," he replied. Penelope grabbed Cooper's arm, her eyes scanning the room. "Are you sure about this, Mark?" "Something doesn't feel right," she tried to argue, but Mark ignored her comment, moving forward into the room. As they explored the first floor, a muffled sound caught their attention. It seemed to be coming from below, from the basement. "Did you hear that?" Cooper asked, alarmed. Mark feigned surprise, but his eyes gleamed with a dark knowledge. "Yeah, let's check it out," he suggested, leading them toward a door that led to the basement. As they descended the creaky stairs, the trio found themselves enveloped in oppressive darkness. The beams from their flashlights revealed a shocking scene. Several people, thin and frightened, were locked in makeshift rooms. Among them were the familiar faces of the Millers, the first family to disappear. Penelope stifled a scream, clinging to Cooper. "Oh my God, it's them." "That's all the missing families," she said. Stunned, Cooper turned to Mark for an explanation, only to find a cold, calculating smile on the realtor's face. In that moment, Mark's true nature was revealed. With a swift motion, he pulled out a gun, pointing it at the Baker couple. "Surprise, welcome to my little long-term investment," he said, his voice filled with morbid satisfaction. Cooper instinctively stepped in front of Penelope, his eyes fixed on the gun. "Mark, what the hell is going on here?" he demanded, his voice a mix of fear and anger. Mark laughed, a cold sound that echoed through the basement walls. "So, Cooper, you have no idea how special this moment is for me. You see, you're just the latest in a long line of tenants." Mark began to circle the couple, his gun always pointed at them, as he launched into his revealing monologue. The Bakers. So curious, so persistent. You have no idea how special this moment is for me. You see, you're just the latest in a long line of tenants. It all started years ago with the Millers. They were the first, the special ones. John Miller, so sharp, so curious. He almost ruined everything. He discovered this place, my little secret. But I was quicker. I brought them here, just as I did with all the others after them. Every family at every sale I made, every disappearance, all part of a bigger plan. You have no idea how profitable it can be to sell the same house over and over again. The beauty is in the details, you know. The haunted house story, the rumors of disappearances, all that just adds to the allure, the value. And the people? Well, people are just a necessary collateral. But you at the Bakers, you almost ruined everything. That damn wall you demolished. Years of careful planning, nearly down the drain. I had to improvise, lead you here. I must admit, it was thrilling watching you unravel the clues I so carefully left behind. The coordinates, a stroke of genius, if I may say so. I knew your curiosity would lead you right into my trap. You can't imagine the work it takes to keep all this going. The logistics of feeding and hiding so many people, of keeping up appearances out there, every disappearance carefully orchestrated, every investigation skillfully diverted. I've become a master of manipulation, creating stories that people want to believe. The haunted house, the urban legends, all part of my elaborate theater. And the best part, no one ever suspected the friendly realtor. After all, who would suspect the man who's just trying to sell a house? The Millers, no, they were special. So close to uncovering everything. On the last day, John got dangerously close to this place. I could see in his eyes that he knew, that he had connected the dots. It was thrilling, really. The cat and mouse, the final chase. But in the end, like all the others, they underestimated how far I was willing to go to protect my empire. You see, each family brought a new challenge, a new thrill. Some fought, others begged, but they all ended up here, part of my private collection. It's almost poetic, don't you think? An entire community vanished, living beneath the feet of those who continue their lives above and unaware of it all. You would have been perfect for the next cycle. So confident, so naive, but now, I'm afraid you'll have to join the others down here. A real shame. But business is business, and this is my greatest enterprise. Each sale, each disappearance, has grown my fortune, my power. I'm not just a realtor, I'm an architect of mystery. And now, here we are. The grand finale of my greatest show. You're the Bakers, the pinnacle of years of refinement. Who knows? Maybe you'll be the beginning of a new phase, a new chapter in this macabre story. After all, every good businessman knows he must adapt, evolve. And me, I'm the best at what I do. Welcome to your new home, Cooper and Penelope Baker. I hope you enjoy your permanent stay, he said. As Mark spoke, Cooper and Penelope exchanged quick glances, a silent understanding passing between them. Cooper stepped forward, defiant. You're not going to get away with this, Mark. We're not as naive as you think, he argued with a smile. At that moment, as if on cue, the distant sound of sirens began to echo. Mark's confident smile faltered for the first time. Penelope, gathering her courage, spoke up. We've suspected you ever since we found the tape, Mark. The inconsistencies in your story, your strange behavior. We alerted the police before coming here. Who else would be connected to all these people besides the house? The person who sells it. How could you do this to all these people? Game over for you, she demanded furiously. The sound of sirens grew louder with each passing second. Mark, caught off guard, looked around frantically, his mind racing for a way out. No, no, no. This can't be happening, he shouted, his composure finally breaking. Cooper seized the moment of distraction to lunge forward, knocking the gun out of Mark's hand. A fierce struggle ensued, with Penelope rushing to free the prisoners. Within minutes, the house was swarming with heavily armed police officers. Mark was subdued and handcuffed, his criminal empire crumbling before his eyes. As he was being led outside, he cast one last look of disdain at the Bakers. And you don't understand. I created something grand here, Mark shouted. Cooper, holding Penelope close, responded firmly. No, Mark. You created a nightmare, and now it's time to wake up. The rescued families emerged from the basement, blinking against the daylight they hadn't seen in years. Tears of relief and disbelief streamed down their faces. The Millers, the first to disappear, were the last to come out, their eyes carrying the weight of years in captivity. John Miller approached the Bakers, his voice hoarse with emotion. Thank you. You freed us from a nightmare we thought would never end, he said, his voice weak, almost a whisper. As Mark was placed in the police car, Detective Ramirez arrived at the scene, his eyes wide with amazement. He approached the Bakers, shaking his head in disbelief. Good, you did what none of us could do for years. How did you figure it out? Penelope smiled faintly, still processing everything that had happened. Sometimes the truth is hidden in the walls. Literally, she said, and Cooper nodded, adding, and sometimes you have to trust your instincts even when everything seems normal on the surface. The property was now buzzing with activity, with paramedics attending to the victims and police collecting evidence. Mark's elaborate scheme, built over years, had been dismantled in a single night. As the sun rose on the horizon, casting new light on the scene, Cooper and Penelope hugged each other, exhausted but relieved. "It's over," Cooper murmured. Penelope nodded, tears in her eyes. "Yes, it's over. But for those families, a new life is just beginning." They watched the emotional reunions around them, feeling the weight and importance of what they had done. The house that was once the center of so much mystery and fear was now exposed, its secrets revealed in the light of day. And with that, a dark chapter in the town's history was finally closing, making way for a new chapter of hope and recovery. In the weeks following the shocking discovery and Mark's arrest, the small town underwent a profound transformation. News of the rescue of the missing families spread quickly, bringing a mix of relief, shock, and ultimately, hope to the community. Cooper, looking out the window of his new home, reflected, "It's amazing how an entire town can change so quickly. Weeks ago, we were living in fear. Now there's a sense of rebirth in the air," he thought. Cooper and Penelope Baker, now considered local heroes, worked tirelessly to help reintegrate the rescued families. They organized a fundraising campaign to assist the victims in their recovery and adjustment to normal life. The community's response was overwhelming, with donations and support pouring in from all sides. During one of the planning meetings, Penelope said emotionally, "I never imagined our curiosity would lead us to this, but look at us now, helping to rebuild lives we thought were lost forever. It's almost as if fate guided us here," she said. Detective Ramirez, vindicated after years of doubts about the case, led a special task force to fully investigate Mark's scheme. His findings uncovered a network of corruption that extended to some local officials who had, knowingly or unknowingly, helped cover up Mark's activities over the years. In a press conference, Ramirez stated, "This case taught us a valuable lesson about vigilance and responsibility. We can no longer afford to ignore the shadows in our community. From now on, every suspicion will be taken seriously. Every voice will be heard," Ramirez argued. The infamous Victorian house, once the center of so much fear and mystery, became a symbol of rebirth for Cooper and Penelope. Deciding to face their fears, the couple chose to stay in the house, transforming it into a warm and welcoming home. The attic, once a hideout for dark secrets, was renovated into a bright and open space. Cooper, reflecting on the changes shared with Penelope, "It's strange, isn't it? This place that brought us so much fear is now our refuge. Every renovation, every new memory we create here, it's like we're reclaiming not just the house, but our own lives," he said, and Penelope nodded. "And by doing that, we're proving that the past doesn't have to define us. We can choose to turn even our darkest experiences into something positive," she added. Over time, the Bakers' house became an informal gathering place for the rescued families, a place where they could come together, share their recovery journeys, and create new positive memories. These gatherings, filled with heartfelt conversations and healing laughter, helped everyone process their experiences and move forward. During one of these meetings, John Miller, emotional, said to Cooper, "You've turned a place of nightmares into a sanctuary of hope. Every time we walk through this door, we feel like we're rewriting our story, not just remembering it," he said to everyone. The walls that once held terrible secrets now echoed with stories of resilience and friendship. Cooper and Penelope carefully balanced respecting the house's painful past with creating a future full of hope. Penelope, looking around during a particularly lively gathering, thought to herself, "It's amazing how this place has evolved. We haven't erased what happened here, but we're proving that it's possible to grow beyond the pain, to create something beautiful out of suffering. This house is no longer a symbol of fear, but a testament to human resilience." As the sun set over the town, casting a golden glow through the windows of the Bakers' house, it became clear that the shadows of the past had finally given way to a bright future. The house, once the center of a nightmare, now pulsed with life and hope. Cooper and Penelope, holding hands, watched their friends and the rescued families chatting happily in the living room. In that moment, they understood that their true legacy wasn't the house itself, but the community they had helped to heal and unite. The story of the house, once a tale of horror, had transformed into a narrative of the triumph of the human spirit, with every laugh and every hug echoing the message that, even in the darkest circumstances, love and courage can prevail. If you enjoyed this story, we invite you to like this video and subscribe to our channel. Your support motivates us to keep bringing you exciting stories almost every day. Don't miss the next surprising narrative that's about to appear on your screen. We deeply appreciate having you here with us. Now, you can click on the links appearing on your screen right now. We have a special selection just for you, filled with valuable stories and guaranteed entertainment. See you there.